This is the 2020 budget presentation for Central Liberty County Fire and Rescue. This budget presentation will include the budget process calendar, budget objectives, performance measures, the budget revenue, budget expenses, as well as the capital program budget and EMS program budget will be reviewed. This budget presentation is intended to highlight key portions of the final budget and the final budget packet. It will not include all of the data associated with the budget. Detailed presentations of the capital fund budget, EMS program budget, and identified budget challenges will be made at upcoming budget meetings. Brief overviews will be included in this presentation. A budget calendar has been established, highlighting the important dates for the budget process. The first budget meeting will take place on June 1st. There will be a review of the proposed budget with the Central Liberty Board on August 5th. Then there'll be a citizen review of the budget with the board and the City Council. Later on, we'll present performance objectives, as well as how the EMS budget fits into the overall budget. And then there'll be a final public hearing and budget adoption on November 15th. Our objectives for this budget process is to provide a financial pathway for the next 5 years. This will lay the groundwork for future financial planning beyond 2024. This budget process will illustrate the strengths and weaknesses and establish opportunities for us to address those challenges that may be before us. We'll start a process of creating an open and transparent budget and process that highlights and follows industry best practices. This will start the process for creating organizational performance objectives that are tied to the annual budget process, thereby contributing to more transparency. The projected assessed property valuations are highlighted in this slide, along with what the mill rate will be and what the bond tax rate will be through 2021. Some key assumptions and points for revenue projections are that the 2020 revenue includes a one-time contribution from the City of Lizardhead, as well as a reserve account from the Lizardhead County Fire District. It also assumes a 2% growth in assessed valuation based on historical trends. You'll also note that in 2021, there is a revenue drop-off because that's when the bond drops. It also follows key instructions to hold the mill levy rate through 2024. The EMS program revenue shows 2019 data per 2020 instructions. It also assumes a continued 50% collection rate for the balance of the 5-year projection, although this is something that we are going to work on to see if we can improve. It assumes a 2% annual increase in transport fees starting in 2021, as well as a 5% annual growth in the number of EMS transports. Here we see the projected property tax revenue based on the projected assessed property valuations, as well as the revenue from EMS billing and fire prevention fees. This graph illustrates our starting revenue in 2020, and then the revenue from assessed property valuations for operations, as well as that we obtain for the bond. You'll see that there's a drop in revenue in 2022 because that's when the bond drops off, but you'll see a steady increase in revenue after that. An important part of the budget is the personnel costs. We will have at the beginning of 2020 47.5 FTEs. We expect that number to drop within the next few years because of retirements and possibly other reasons for attrition. That will get us down to the approved 44.5 FTEs. We want to try to avoid any layoffs or demotions, and we can offset the cost of the extra personnel in the way of vacation use, injury, illness, possible overtime costs as well. It could change depending on whether we want to go to a 3-platoon or 4-platoon system. There's also no cost of living adjustments included for the 2020 budget. Bargaining with the union may determine what the COLA will be for future years, but the historical trend has been at 2%. We have put into the budget an expense projection at 3%. We have approximately 50% of our firefighters that are already maxed out on the pay scale. So with the cost of living adjustment of 2% for them, and then we have about 50% that are below the maximum salary schedule. So we might see a 2% cost of living adjustment for them and a possible additional 1% merit increase. This is the current salary schedule showing the starting salary as well as the top salary. This is a further breakdown of the cost for administrative staff as well as that for suppression staff. Also takes into consideration the cost for paramedic pay, benefits, and gives us a total amount for compensation. We're able to compare the revenue for the next 5 years as well as the expenditures and what that will leave us for operating reserve as well as the creation of a capital fund. Our goal is to have a 15% operational reserve. This is something that we'll be working towards in the next 5 years. By 2024, we should clearly have a 15% operational reserve. You also see the capital fund balance building. We may spend that within the next 5 years, depending on what the needs are. We'll talk a little bit more about what those challenges might be. So as a review, as far as balance sheet projections go, some key assumptions are that we'll have a one-time contribution, which shows an increased amount of revenue for the first year over the next 5 years. That revenue will drop off, especially additional revenue that we're getting for the bond in 2021. This includes the creation of an operational reserve fund with the goal of maintaining a fund of at least 15% by 2024 and afterwards. It also includes the creation of a capital reserve fund. This slide illustrates how expenditures and revenue will be parallel at about 2023. So we'll see a rise in expenditures, but revenue should be able to keep up with it, at least for operational needs. Now, when we take a look at the capital fund budget, based on our aging fleet and aging facilities, we're substantially underfunded. There'll be a lengthy list of facility upgrades and improvements and repairs that are not funded. and the budget does not include the needed purchase of a replacement fire engine in 2022 for a 2023 in-service date. We do have cross-trained firefighter medics, firefighter EMTs that help us with our transport services. You'll note that our projected profit loss is in the black. However, it does not give us substantial revenue. And of course, this is based on a 50% collection rate. So some key considerations regarding the cost of our EMS program includes that we have 3 of our most expensive firefighter paramedics assigned to EMS, 3 of our most expensive firefighter EMTs assigned to EMS service, and 70% of the EMS program staffing costs are tied to transporting. About 30% of the EMS program staffing costs are tied to just normal basic delivery of EMS services to our residents. A review of 2020 response data will highlight more accurate modeling for future program budgets. Again, this is based on a 5% annual growth in EMS responses and 2% annual increase in EMS transport fees. Some key recommendations for 2020 regarding our EMS program is, as we mentioned, there's a significant amount of potential revenue that's not being collected. So we'll be researching ways to increase this collection rate. We've established a benchmark to try to increase that by 5% for the next 3 years. Some of the ways that we might do this is taking a look at how our billing and collection is being done. Also take a look at the overtime that is utilized for the transport services. Make sure that we're tracking that and take another look at our position controls for this part of our services. We'll also want to develop programs and policies to track key expenses such as fuel, medical supplies, and vehicle maintenance. So at this point, some of our key budget takeaways is that we'll need to make sure that we're establishing stable funding for initial organizational creation, and key for the first few years is we've tried to show at the 5-year projection. With the completion of the initial contract and establishment of key financial mechanisms, this will highlight funding balance needs for the next 5 years. We'll need to make sure that we've got some stable funding for personnel and key personnel safety expenses. So more work will have to be done to evaluate the need for PPE, SCBAs, and other health and safety things that we need for personnel. As we pointed out, capital funding at this point is going to be a challenge. There's going to be some significant needs that are unfunded. So we'll need to take a look at some steps by 2024 to make sure that we can replace the apparatus and equipment as needed, as well as for facility upgrades so that we don't find ourselves behind the 8 ball. Even with substantial increases in EMS transport fees, if we're able to accomplish our goals, it's still not a significant amount of revenue that will help us with the capital planning and expenditures. Our future budget meetings will highlight detailed EMS program budget presentations, a more detailed capital fund budget presentation so you're able to get a clearer picture of what we're talking about there, as well as the first and second quarter budget goals for 2020. You'll have a more complete packet that will show all the data associated with the revenue collection as well as the expenditures. We'll also have additional plans for personnel management and planning efforts to reach organizational goals of 44.5 FTEs as requested.